Have you ever read a book for 20 minutes and literally not read it at all? Your eyes were scanning the page, reading the lines, but somehow you didn't read it? You got distracted by thoughts about that new shirt you wanted to buy. You did not focus, and these 20 minutes felt absolutely worthless. Today we will uncover how learning really works in the brain without useless distractions. How you will ace any test in school or college. Hang on and you will become an academic weapon. You probably learned something today. You were scrolling through TikTok and some fact appeared on the For You page. You opened Wikipedia and read a summary about that fact. Or you had a discussion with someone who told you something you did not know. We all learn constantly, and that from the day we were born. You learned to speak, you learned how to write, you learned how to communicate and how to behave, hopefully. Learning is a fundamental part of our lives. However, we were never taught how to learn. Isn't that ridiculous? We spent 10 years in school and 5 years in university without ever having talked about what is the best technique to learn, what type of learner am I, what works best for me. It's incredible. This channel aims to fill that gap, giving a full coverage on learning in order for you to become the best academic version of yourself. So, if you want to go on that journey with me, turn on that bell, you know what it is. Neuroscience has come a long way in the recent 20 years. We basically know which areas of the brain do what and for what purpose. We know how neurons that fire together wire together. You probably heard of that one before. We know about the mechanics on a synaptic level. We know what the main factors are to contribute to a healthy brain. So we should leverage these facts to make learning as easy as possible, right? There are over 80 billion neurons in your brain. Each one has approximately 10,000 connections to other neurons. When you learn something, your brain adapts. The connections between neurons become stronger, forming networks of knowledge, while other unused networks of knowledge fade away over time if not frequently activated. That is why you lose knowledge over time that is not frequently reactivated. However, when you learn something, these new connections become stronger and first feel really hard to build. It is really difficult in the beginning to get started with a completely unknown subject. Your neurons fire and wire and try to form connections, which is exhausting. But over time, the more you practice one topic, the easier it becomes for you to recover the knowledge. Also because you have built a backlog of knowledge that you can build on. Every time you use that newly learned knowledge, it becomes easier to use. This is called long-term potentiation. This is the first key concept of learning. Remember learning vocabulary from a foreign language you had to memorize? First, it felt terrible to learn. It was exhausting, as I said. But the more you repeated the words, the easier it became, because over time the network of connections in your brain became so strong that the information was on call, so to say. Learning is leveraging. What do I mean by that? If you have absolutely no clue about a topic, the start is by far the hardest. You have no neuron connections to work with, no network to rely upon. This is where frustration kicks in. However, over time, once you build a solid base, your neural networks start to form connections with each other. You can leverage your last week's knowledge. For example, you have learned how to calculate a two-dimensional integral, which was very hard because you only knew how this works for one dimension, right? But since you learned to abstract from your knowledge, the step towards the third dimension is considerably easier. Your brain knows where to ask. Learning, especially in the beginning, is always exhausting, as I said, but we have to find ways to make it as convenient as possible, which is also one goal of this channel. To circle back to the intro, if you've ever read a text and not read it at all, that might have been because you were not engaged with it in multiple ways. The more you engage with the subject, the more you learn because your brain can form more connections given that the amount of sensory inputs has increased. For example, you read a text, cool, one stream of information. Now try to read the text out loud, two streams of information that your brain processes by firing and wiring neurons. Now try to read out loud and after 10 sentences, try to summarize the text. A third dimension comes into play, abstraction. You really have to think about what you just read. Your neurons are firing like crazy. Now you really start learning by that abstraction. You have to really memorize what you just read. And you will certainly realize that if you not read it correctly, the abstraction will not work, which is also a positive reinforcement loop. However, overstretching things can also lead to negative impacts. If you don't distribute your learning, it will be impossible for your brain to form long-lasting connections. This is called distributed practice effect. Imagine you're trying to become a pro basketball athlete, and that only by training the night before your draft. You invest 10 hours of your hardest work into that one session. What will be the result? Nothing. Nada. You try to squeeze 10 weeks of practice into one night. Your brain is exhausted and the last 8 hours of training were useless compared to the energy invested. The same goes for learning for school or university. You need to stretch your learning over a time period. 2 hours a day for 4 weeks rather than 10 hours the night before the test. Otherwise, all information will be forgotten. This is why time planning is important if you want to become an academic weapon. You need to manage your time. There's no way around that. Make a plan and tell yourself when you want to learn. Set a calendar entry, and when it's time, switch off your goddamn phone and learn. This was just a brief intro to this channel and the work we will be conducting here. We all want to be academic weapons, but only with the right approach and techniques this will work efficiently. So hit that bell, send this to your friends if you have any. I don't, because I'm an academic weapon. And in the next video we will be talking about factors that mainly influence the effectiveness of learning that students usually don't really care about, but they really need to understand them in order to become an academic weapon. So, see you soon, guys.